quite frequently, someone will come up and present the idea that there are sophisticated theologians, that this preacher that I had a debate with is in one category, and some other academic, erudite theologians are in another category. Is that the case?
Well, there are sophisticated theologians who accept evolution, of course, and have no problem with that. And so our argument with them is a quite separate argument. I have met sophisticated theologians who believe pretty astonishing things, like believing literally that Jesus turned water into wine. And I thought sophisticated theologians had written all that stuff off and said, oh no, that's just metaphor, that's just a nice story, we don't really believe that anymore. But I have spoken to very, very highly qualified, sophisticated theologians, highly educated. They accept evolution totally, but yet they think Jesus turned water into wine and walked on water and rose from the dead and was born of a virgin. All very unscientific ideas, and still they call themselves sophisticated theologians.
Well, first we should acknowledge that sophistication is better insofar as it means moderation and less of a commitment to the most dangerous ideas. But my problem with so-called sophisticated theology is that no one ever admits where the sophistication is coming from. It's coming from a loss of faith in specific doctrines. I mean, it's getting hammered into them from the outside. So it's coming from science and a modern conception of ethics, a universal conception of human rights, a sense of how unseemly it is to think that anyone, by virtue of being born in the wrong place, is going to spend eternity in hell just because they didn't happen to hear the good word from their parents. So they lose their purchase on those dogmas, and yet they retain this conviction that Jesus was born of a virgin or was resurrected and will be coming back. And those are just it's a God of the gaps argument in certain cases, but there's just certain questions where science hasn't yet closed the door to belief, and so they're putting all of their chips on those questions.
We might have slightly different views of what a sophisticated theologian is, which is probably a testament to how it's actually not sophisticated theology, but obfuscated theology. Because when I hear someone say, oh, you take calls on the atheist experience and you get people who couldn't present a reasonable argument at all, why don't you take on real sophisticated theologians? And my answer is always, tell them to call in, here's the phone number, they can call in whatever week they want. And they'll say, well, but here's this, academic who's presented this particular version of the ontological argument, the moral argument. And it's, you've got Ray Comfort, the banana man, on one hand, and they pretend that there's something superior with regard to argumentation on the other. And the many years I've been hosting the show and doing debates, what I find is what gets labeled as sophisticated theology is the exact same thing. It's not like the arguments of these sophisticated theologians are any more sound than the arguments of Ray Comfort. It's just that they're better speakers.
They're actually less sound in one way, in that they don't. So the belief system is still anchored to a belief in revelation. They're still fixated on the texts, but they have ignored much of what seems untenable in the texts, and they don't have an argument about why that's okay. Because if God wrote any of these books, and nowhere in the book does God say, well, you could ignore the first half because now I'm getting to the good part. It's all God's word. So it's actually a less principled position than fundamentalism. And that's why it's always, in my view, unstable in the face of fundamentalism, because the fundamentalist is always on the side of, or always has the advantage of saying, listen, I'm going to read the whole book, I'm going to take the most plausible interpretation of it, I'm going to read every word as literally as possible, and that always begins to fixate on more divisive, more doctrinaire, more irrational ideas.
At least with a fundamentalist, you know what you're arguing against.
Yeah.
You're not arguing against a wet sponge.
No, it seems perverse to say it, but there's actually more integrity to the most fundamentalist position, because there's simply one irrational move, which is the belief that this book is perfect in every word. But the moment you believe that, well, then it is in fact rational to try to connect all the dots as reasonably as possible.